Picture this: towering figures, half divine and half human, striding across the ancient world with power that dwarfed mortal kings. Their shadows stretched across continents, their voices commanded the elements, and their rule shaped the very foundations of civilization itself. These weren't gods dwelling in distant heavens, but beings of flesh and blood who walked among our ancestors, wielding authority that seemed to bend reality to their will. Welcome to Mystery History for Sleep, where we venture into the shadows of forgotten ages to uncover truths that challenge everything we thought we knew about our past. I'm your guide through these ancient mysteries, and tonight we're diving deep into one of the most provocative questions ever posed about human history. What if the Nephilim, those enigmatic giants mentioned in ancient texts, weren't just mythological beings, but Earth's first true rulers? Close your eyes and let your mind drift back to a time before recorded history, before the rise of Egypt's pharaohs or Mesopotamia's god-kings. Imagine a world where beings of incredible stature and supernatural ability established the first great civilizations, teaching primitive humans the arts of agriculture, architecture, and governance. What if every legend of giant kings, every myth of divine rulers descending from the heavens, wasn't folklore at all, but fragmented memories of an age when the Nephilim reigned supreme? The very word Nephilim sends chills through those who encounter it in ancient Hebrew texts. Translated as the fallen ones, or those who cause others to fall, these beings appear in the Book of Genesis with tantalizing brevity. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. But this single passage raises more questions than it answers. Who exactly were these sons of God? What made their offspring so mighty that they earned the title men of renown? And perhaps most intriguingly, why does the text suggest they existed both before and after the Great Flood that supposedly wiped clean the slate of human civilization? For centuries, theologians and scholars have debated these questions, often settling into comfortable interpretations that keep such beings safely in the realm of allegory or myth. But what if we've been looking at this all wrong? What if the Nephilim weren't supernatural anomalies, but the natural result of an encounter between two different species of intelligent beings? What if they represented Earth's first attempt at creating a hybrid ruling class, beings who possessed both the advanced knowledge of their divine fathers and the earthbound wisdom of their human mothers? Tonight, we're going to explore this possibility through a lens that mainstream academia rarely dares to apply. We'll examine ancient texts not as religious allegory, but as historical documents recording actual events. We'll look at archaeological evidence not through the filter of preconceived notions about primitive ancient peoples, but with the understanding that our ancestors might have witnessed things we can barely comprehend. And we'll consider the implications of a world where the first kings weren't just powerful humans, but beings whose very nature transcended the boundaries between heaven and earth. The story begins in the mists of prehistory, when the world was young and the boundaries between the divine and mortal realms were far more permeable than they are today. Ancient Jewish tradition speaks of the Watchers, a group of 200 angelic beings who descended to Mount Hermon with a mission that would forever alter the course of human history. Led by figures with names that still echo through esoteric traditions, Semyaza, Azazel, Barakel, these beings weren't content to observe humanity from afar. Instead, they chose to intervene directly in human affairs, taking mortal women as wives and teaching humanity knowledge that was meant to remain hidden. The Book of Enoch, excluded from most biblical canons but preserved in Ethiopian Christianity, provides a detailed account of what happened next. These Watchers taught humans the secrets of metalworking, turning plowshares into swords and inaugurating the age of warfare. They revealed the mysteries of cosmetics and jewelry, introducing vanity and material desire. Most significantly, they shared knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and writing, jump-starting human civilization in ways that seemed to violate the natural order of gradual development. But perhaps their most profound impact came through their offspring. When divine beings mated with human women, the result wasn't simply larger humans, but an entirely new category of being. The Nephilim possessed physical statures that dwarfed normal humans, some traditions claiming they stood anywhere from 9 to 30 feet tall. More importantly, they inherited supernatural abilities from their fathers, while retaining the earthbound connection to humanity through their mothers. This unique combination made them natural leaders, beings who could bridge the gap between the divine realm and mortal concerns. Imagine the awe that early humans must have felt encountering these giants. Here were beings who possessed not just physical supremacy, but intellectual and spiritual advantages that seemed to mark them as the rightful rulers of Earth. They understood the movement of stars and could predict the changing of seasons. They knew the secrets of agriculture that could feed entire populations and the principles of engineering that could raise monuments to last for millennia. Most crucially, they carried within themselves the authority of the divine realm, making their rule seem not just practical, but cosmically ordained. The implications of Nephilim kingship extend far beyond simple physical dominance. These beings would have established the first true civilizations, creating complex societies with sophisticated understanding of law, governance, and social organization. Their hybrid nature would have given them unique insights into both human psychology and divine justice, allowing them to create legal systems that addressed both earthly concerns and spiritual principles. They would have been the first priest-kings, combining secular authority with religious legitimacy in ways that would echo through every subsequent civilization. Consider how this model of divine kingship appears throughout ancient cultures worldwide. In Egypt, pharaohs claimed direct descent from the gods and possessed divine attributes that set them apart from ordinary mortals. Mesopotamian kings similarly ruled with authority granted by celestial beings, often depicting themselves as intermediaries between heaven and earth. Even in distant cultures like those of the Americas, rulers claimed descent from sky gods and possessed knowledge that seemed to transcend normal human limitations. What if these weren't independent cultural developments, but echoes of an earlier age when such divine human hybrids actually did rule the earth? What if the concept of divine kingship wasn't a religious innovation, but a cultural memory of a time when kings truly were partially divine? The archaeological record, when viewed through this lens, begins to tell a fascinating story. Megalithic structures worldwide display engineering capabilities that challenge our understanding of ancient technological limitations. From the precisely fitted stones of Puma Punku to the massive blocks of Baalbek, from the perfectly aligned Pyramids of Giza to the mysterious statues of Easter Island, we find evidence of construction techniques that seem to require not just advanced knowledge, but perhaps superhuman strength and coordination. Traditional archaeology attributes these achievements to clever engineering and massive human labour forces. But what if the truth is simpler and more extraordinary? What if these monuments were built under the direction of beings who possessed both the intellectual capacity to conceive such projects and the physical power to execute them? The Nephilim, with their giant statures and inherited divine knowledge, would have been perfectly positioned to oversee such massive construction projects. The timeline becomes even more intriguing when we consider the global flood narratives that appear in cultures worldwide. If the Nephilim were indeed Earth's first kings, establishing the earliest civilizations, then the flood represents not just a natural disaster, but a cosmic intervention designed to reset human development. The biblical account suggests that the Nephilim's reign had led humanity down a dark path, introducing violence, corruption, and forbidden knowledge that threatened the natural order. Yet the text also cryptically mentions that the Nephilim existed also afterward, suggesting that some survived the flood, or that the conditions that created them were somehow re-established in the post-flood world. This opens up even more provocative possibilities about the nature of ancient kingship and the true origins of human civilization. The ancient world's obsession with genealogies and bloodlines takes on new significance when viewed through this lens. If the first kings were indeed Nephilim, then royal bloodlines weren't just about political legitimacy, but about preserving and concentrating divine genetics. The careful intermarrying of royal families, the emphasis on pure bloodlines, the concept of royal blood itself, all begin to make sense as attempts to maintain whatever fraction of Nephilim heritage remained in the post-flood world. This perspective also illuminates the ancient world's fascination with giants. From Goliath of Gath to the giants mentioned in Numbers, from the titans of Greek mythology to the giants of Norse legend, cultures worldwide preserved memories of beings whose size and power set them apart from ordinary humans. Rather than dismissing these as exaggerated folklore, what if they represent cultural memories of an age when such beings actually walked the earth? The implications extend even further when we consider the sophisticated knowledge that ancient civilizations possessed. The precise astronomical alignments of ancient monuments suggest understanding of celestial mechanics that shouldn't have been possible without advanced mathematical knowledge. Ancient texts describe medical procedures, metallurgical processes, and engineering techniques that seem anachronistic for their supposed time periods. Traditional explanations involve slow cultural development and lost knowledge, but what if the answer is simpler? What if this advanced knowledge was inherited from the Nephilim themselves, beings who possess divine understanding of natural laws and cosmic principles? Their rule wouldn't just have been politically significant, but would have represented a golden age of human development, a time when divine knowledge was directly accessible to human civilization through their hybrid nature. The religious implications of Nephilim kingship are equally profound. If these beings truly served as Earth's first rulers, then they would have established the first religious systems, creating the frameworks through which humans understood their relationship with the divine realm. The universality of certain religious concepts, flood narratives, divine kingship, heaven and earth cosmologies might reflect not independent cultural development, but the global influence of Nephilim civilization. These priest-kings would have possessed unique authority to establish religious practices because they carried within themselves the connection to both realms. Their word wouldn't just have been law, but divine revelation, making their religious innovations carry the weight of cosmic truth rather than human speculation. As we drift deeper into this mystery, the conventional timeline of human development begins to blur and shift. The neat progression from hunter-gatherers to agricultural societies to complex civilizations might be an oversimplification that misses a crucial chapter in human history. What if there was an earlier age, a time when humanity achieved heights of civilization under Nephilim guidance that we've only recently begun to rediscover? The evidence, when assembled carefully and examined without preconceived notions about what ancient peoples could or couldn't achieve, begins to paint a picture of a world far stranger and more wonderful than mainstream history suggests. From the megalithic monuments that dot the globe to the sophisticated astronomical knowledge preserved in ancient texts, from the universal themes of divine kingship to the persistent legends of giants and gods walking among men, the clues point toward a forgotten chapter of human history. But this is only the beginning of our exploration. The question of Nephilim kingship opens doors to even deeper mysteries about the nature of consciousness, the reality of divine intervention in human affairs, and the true timeline of human development on this planet. As we continue this journey through the shadows of forgotten history, we'll discover that the implications of Nephilim rule extend far beyond ancient civilizations into questions about our own origins, our destiny, and the cosmic forces that continue to shape our world in ways we're only beginning to understand. The giants of old may have vanished from the earth, but their legacy remains encoded in our monuments, our myths, and perhaps even in our very DNA, waiting for those brave enough to look beyond conventional explanations and embrace the possibility that our past is far more extraordinary than we've ever dared to imagine. The ancient Sumerian king lists tell a story that should make any serious historian pause and reconsider everything they think they know about early human civilization. These aren't mythological tales passed down through oral tradition, but meticulously maintained records carved in stone and preserved on clay tablets. They speak of rulers whose reigns lasted not decades but centuries and millennia. Etana, who ruled for 1,560 years. Dumuzid the shepherd, whose reign spanned 36,000 years. Enmenluana, who held power for an astounding 43,200 years. Traditional scholarship dismisses these numbers as religious symbolism or mythological exaggeration. But what if we're looking at this through the wrong lens entirely? What if these weren't human kings at all, but Nephilim rulers whose supernatural lifespans allowed them to guide human civilization through its most crucial developmental phases? The mathematics alone should give us pause. If we calculate the average human lifespan during the supposed period of these early kings, we're looking at perhaps 40 to 50 years. Yet these rulers allegedly maintained power for thousands of years. Either the ancient Sumerians had a completely different understanding of time itself, or they were recording the reigns of beings whose very nature transcended normal human limitations. Consider the practical implications of such longevity in leadership. A Nephilim king who ruled for millennia wouldn't just accumulate political power, but vast stores of knowledge, experience, and wisdom that no human ruler could match. They would witness the rise and fall of entire human generations, learning from mistakes and refining their governance over centuries of direct experience. This would create a level of administrative sophistication and cultural continuity that purely human civilizations couldn't achieve until much later in history. The sudden appearance of complex civilizations like Sumer makes far more sense when viewed through this lens. Rather than humans somehow developing advanced agriculture, mathematics, writing, and urban planning simultaneously across multiple regions, we see the guiding hand of beings who possessed this knowledge from the beginning. The Nephilim wouldn't need to invent these technologies through trial and error over generations. They would inherit divine understanding of natural laws and cosmic principles, then apply this knowledge to uplift human civilization under their rule. This model also explains the uncanny similarities between ancient civilizations that supposedly developed independently: the stepped pyramids of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Mesoamerica, the sophisticated astronomical observations recorded in cultures across the globe, the remarkably similar flood narratives preserved in traditions from Sumeria to the Americas. Rather than coincidental parallel development, these similarities suggest the global influence of Nephilim civilization, beings whose rule extended across vast territories and whose knowledge seeded multiple human cultures. The physical evidence becomes equally compelling when viewed through this framework. Ancient depictions of rulers consistently show them as larger and more imposing than their subjects. Egyptian pharaohs tower over their courtiers in wall reliefs. Mesopotamian kings dominate their scenes with superhuman stature. Even in distant cultures, rulers are depicted with proportions that suggest they belong to a different category of being entirely. But perhaps most intriguing are the scattered references to actual giant skeletons discovered throughout history. Before the establishment of modern archaeological protocols, newspapers regularly reported the discovery of human remains of enormous size. The Smithsonian Institution's early reports mention skeletons ranging from 8 to 12 feet in height, found in burial mounds across North America. Similar discoveries were reported in Europe, Asia, and South America, often in context suggesting these beings held positions of leadership or religious significance. The systematic suppression of such evidence raises uncomfortable questions about what forces might be working to keep this aspect of human history hidden. Why would the discovery of giant human remains be so threatening to established historical narratives? What interests would be served by ensuring that the possibility of Nephilim rulers remains in the realm of religious mythology rather than historical inquiry? The answer might lie in the implications such discoveries would have for our understanding of human origins and development. If the Nephilim were real, if they truly served as Earth's first kings, then human civilization didn't develop through purely natural evolutionary processes. Instead, it represents a guided development, a collaboration between earthbound humanity and beings who possess divine attributes. This challenges not just historical timelines, but fundamental assumptions about human independence and the nature of our relationship with higher forms of consciousness. The religious texts themselves provide fascinating glimpses into what Nephilim rule might have looked like in practice. The Book of Enoch describes these beings as possessing vast knowledge of natural sciences, teaching humans about astronomy, meteorology, and the movements of celestial bodies. They introduced advanced metallurgy, showing humans how to forge weapons and tools that transform their capabilities. They revealed the secrets of agriculture, enabling the population growth that made complex civilizations possible. But the texts also hint at darker aspects of Nephilim rule. Their introduction of warfare transformed human conflict from simple tribal disputes into organized violence on a massive scale. Their teaching of cosmetics and jewelry introduced vanity and material desire that corrupted human values. Most concerning, they revealed knowledge that was meant to remain hidden, violating cosmic laws about the appropriate relationship between divine and mortal realms. This suggests that Nephilim kingship wasn't an unqualified blessing for humanity. While these rulers possessed the wisdom and power to advance human civilization rapidly, they also introduced elements that ultimately led to humanity's downfall. The flood narratives might represent not just divine punishment for human wickedness, but cosmic intervention to prevent the complete corruption of human nature through inappropriate divine influence. The post-flood world presents even more intriguing possibilities. If the biblical account is accurate in stating that Nephilim existed also afterward, then some form of divine-human hybridization continued or was re-established after the Great Deluge. This might explain why ancient civilizations like Egypt and Mesopotamia seem to emerge with such sophisticated knowledge and organizational capabilities. Rather than starting from scratch, post-flood humanity might have been guided by surviving Nephilim or new hybrid beings who carried forward the accumulated wisdom of the pre-flood world. The concept of divine kingship that dominated ancient civilizations worldwide suddenly makes perfect sense in this context. Pharaohs who claimed to be living gods weren't engaging in political theatre or religious delusion. They were asserting their connection to the Nephilim lineage, claiming whatever fraction of divine heritage remained in their bloodlines after the flood. Their elaborate burial practices, their obsession with preserving their bodies for eternity, their belief in their continued rule in the afterlife, all reflect an understanding that they possessed a nature that transcended normal human limitations. The careful maintenance of royal bloodlines throughout the ancient world takes on new significance when viewed as attempts to preserve and concentrate whatever Nephilim genetics survived the flood. The prohibition against commoners marrying into royal families wasn't just about political power, but about maintaining the supernatural abilities and extended lifespans that came with divine heritage. The complex genealogies that ancient cultures preserved with such meticulous care weren't just family trees, but genetic maps tracking the inheritance of superhuman traits. This perspective also illuminates the ancient world's fascination with achieving divine status through various means. The mystery schools of Egypt, Greece, and other cultures promised initiates the ability to transcend human limitations and achieve godlike consciousness. Alchemical traditions sought to create artificial means of extending life and gaining supernatural abilities. These weren't just spiritual metaphors, but practical attempts to regain the hybrid nature that the Nephilim possessed naturally. The megalithic monuments that dot our planet begin to make sense as products of Nephilim engineering. The precisely fitted stones of ancient Peru, some weighing hundreds of tons, positioned with tolerances that modern construction struggles to match. The massive trilithons of Baalbek moved and positioned using techniques that remain mysterious today. The perfect astronomical alignments of sites like Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids, demonstrating knowledge of celestial mechanics that supposedly primitive peoples shouldn't have possessed. Rather than crediting these achievements to clever human engineering and massive labour forces, we might be looking at the direct involvement of beings whose supernatural strength and divine knowledge made such projects not just possible, but relatively straightforward. A Nephilim ruler with the strength of 10 men and inherited understanding of advanced mathematics and astronomy could oversee construction projects that would challenge even modern capabilities. The sudden disappearance of the megalithic building tradition becomes equally mysterious and significant. After a certain point in ancient history, humans seem to lose the ability to work with massive stones with the same precision and scale. The techniques for moving and positioning enormous blocks were apparently forgotten, never to be recovered. This suggests that the knowledge and capability weren't developed through gradual human innovation, but were dependent on the direct involvement of beings who eventually departed, or whose bloodlines became too diluted to maintain their supernatural abilities. The implications extend beyond ancient history into questions about human potential and development. If we are the descendants of beings who once possessed supernatural abilities, then perhaps those capabilities aren't permanently lost but merely dormant. The persistent human fascination with transcending physical limitations, achieving extended lifespans, and gaining access to higher forms of consciousness might represent genetic memories of our Nephilim heritage, calling us back to our true potential. Modern discoveries in genetics and consciousness research hint at possibilities that would have seemed like fantasy just decades ago. Scientists are beginning to understand how consciousness might transcend the physical brain, how genetic expression can be influenced by environmental factors and even intention, how human potential might extend far beyond current limitations. What if these aren't new discoveries, but rediscoveries of truths that the Nephilim knew instinctively? The ancient texts speak of a future restoration, a time when the knowledge and abilities that were lost would be recovered. The prophecies describe an age when the barriers between divine and human consciousness would once again become permeable, when beings with supernatural abilities would walk the earth, when humanity would reclaim its connection to higher realms of existence. As we drift deeper into this exploration of forgotten possibilities, the conventional boundaries between myth and history, between religious tradition and scientific inquiry, begin to dissolve. The evidence, scattered across disciplines and suppressed by institutional interests, points toward a past far stranger and more wonderful than mainstream narratives suggest. The giants of old may have faded from direct memory, but their influence continues to shape our world in ways we're only beginning to recognize. The genetic legacy of the Nephilim may be far more tangible than most scholars dare to acknowledge. Recent advances in DNA analysis have revealed anomalies in human genetic history that traditional evolutionary models struggle to explain. scientists have identified periods of rapid genetic change that seem to coincide with the emergence of early civilizations. These genetic bottlenecks and expansions suggest external influences on human development that go beyond natural selection and environmental adaptation. What if these genetic signatures aren't the result of random mutation and survival pressures, but evidence of deliberate hybridization? The Nephilim bloodlines, diluted over millennia but never completely eliminated, might still carry markers that distinguish them from purely human ancestry. Certain royal families throughout history have displayed remarkable consistency in specific physical traits, intellectual capabilities, and even lifespans that exceed normal human averages. The Habsburg jaw, the elongated skulls found in various royal burial sites, the unusual height and build of certain dynastic lines, these aren't just interesting historical footnotes. They might represent the last vestiges of Nephilim genetics struggling to express themselves through increasingly diluted bloodlines. The ancient practice of royal intermarriage, dismissed by modern historians as political necessity or cultural tradition, takes on new significance when viewed as an attempt to concentrate and preserve these supernatural genetic markers. Consider the mystery of the Paracas skulls, elongated craniums discovered in Peru that possess 25% more cranial capacity than normal human skulls. DNA analysis has revealed genetic markers that don't match any known human populations. The bone structure is different, the volume is different, even the number of suture lines differs from standard human anatomy. Traditional archaeology explains these as the result of artificial cranial deformation, but this explanation fails to account for the increased brain volume and the structural differences that can't be achieved through external pressure alone. What if these skulls represent the last physical evidence of Nephilim heritage? The elongated craniums might not be artificial modifications, but natural expressions of hybrid genetics attempting to accommodate brain structures designed for superhuman intelligence. The red hair frequently found with these remains, the unusual genetic markers that don't match any terrestrial population, all point toward beings who possessed a fundamentally different biological nature than pure humans. The ancient Egyptian royal mummies tell a similar story. Pharaohs consistently display physical characteristics that set them apart from their subjects: unusual height, distinctive cranial features, bone density that suggests superhuman strength. Akhenaten's family shows particularly striking anomalies: elongated skulls, unusual limb proportions, distinctive facial features that appear across multiple generations. These aren't the result of artistic stylization or cultural preferences, but documented physical differences preserved in actual skeletal remains. The careful mummification process that Egyptian royalty underwent takes on new meaning when viewed as an attempt to preserve Nephilim genetics for future resurrection or analysis. The elaborate burial chambers, the sophisticated preservation techniques, the belief in physical resurrection all suggest that these rulers understood something about their biological nature that went beyond normal human mortality. They weren't just preserving bodies, but safeguarding genetic legacies that they believed held cosmic significance. The global distribution of megalithic sites reveals patterns that suggest coordinated construction under unified leadership. These aren't random cultural developments, but evidence of a worldwide civilization that possessed both the knowledge and the capability to undertake massive engineering projects across vast distances. The similarities in construction techniques, the consistent astronomical alignments, the mathematical relationships encoded in stone, all point toward builders who shared a common knowledge base and organizational structure. The precision required for such coordination suggests communication and transportation capabilities that supposedly primitive civilizations shouldn't have possessed. But Nephilim rulers, with their extended lifespans and inherited divine knowledge, could have maintained contact across global distances through means we don't yet understand. Their hybrid nature might have included telepathic or other supernatural communication abilities that allowed them to coordinate activities across continents without the technological infrastructure we consider necessary today. The sudden abandonment of megalithic construction worldwide points toward a coordinated withdrawal rather than gradual cultural decline. Sites across the globe show evidence of being deliberately sealed or abandoned, as if their builders knew they wouldn't be returning. Tools were left in place, construction materials abandoned mid-project, entire complexes buried under tons of earth and stone. This suggests not conquest or natural disaster, but planned departure by beings who expected their absence to be temporary. The flood narratives preserved in cultures worldwide might describe not just a natural catastrophe, but a cosmic intervention designed to end the age of Nephilim rule. If these beings had indeed corrupted human development by introducing forbidden knowledge and inappropriate divine influence, then the deluge represents a reset mechanism, a way to preserve humanity while ending the hybrid experiment that had gone too far. But the cryptic biblical reference to Nephilim existing also afterward suggests that the intervention wasn't completely successful. Some hybrid bloodlines survived, either through the flood itself or through renewed contact between divine beings and humans in the post-flood world. This might explain why post-flood civilizations like Egypt and Mesopotamia emerged with such sophisticated knowledge and organizational capabilities. They weren't starting from scratch, but rebuilding under the guidance of surviving Nephilim or their descendants. The mystery schools and esoteric traditions that flourished in ancient civilizations might represent attempts to preserve and transmit Nephilim knowledge through purely human lineages. The initiation rituals, the carefully guarded secrets, the promise of transcending human limitations all suggest teaching methods designed to awaken dormant supernatural abilities in students who possessed sufficient Nephilim heritage. These weren't just spiritual practices, but genetic activation techniques designed to unlock the hybrid potential that lay dormant in certain bloodlines. The consistent themes across these traditions, the emphasis on achieving divine consciousness, the practices designed to extend life and gain supernatural abilities, the belief in the perfectibility of human nature, all point toward knowledge originally possessed by the Nephilim and carefully transmitted through their descendants. The alchemical quest for immortality, the mystical pursuit of divine union, the magical practices designed to manipulate natural forces, these weren't human innovations, but attempts to regain capabilities that the hybrid bloodlines had lost through dilution and time. The architectural legacy of the Nephilim extends beyond mere construction techniques to include encoded information systems built into the monuments themselves. The mathematical relationships embedded in the Great Pyramid, the astronomical alignments of Stonehenge, the geometric patterns found in megalithic sites worldwide, all suggest that these structures serve as more than just impressive buildings. They might function as libraries, preserving crucial information in stone form that could survive global catastrophes and cultural collapses. The precision required to encode such information suggests builders who possessed both advanced mathematical knowledge and the long-term perspective necessary to create permanent storage systems. Nephilim rulers, with their extended lifespans and divine inheritance, would understand the importance of preserving knowledge across civilizational cycles. They would know that human cultures rise and fall, that languages change and writing systems are forgotten, but that information encoded in stone and aligned with cosmic constants could endure indefinitely. The recent discovery of additional chambers within ancient monuments using modern scanning technology suggests that we've barely begun to uncover the full scope of information preserved in these structures. Ground-penetrating radar reveals hidden passages, sealed chambers, and complex internal geometries that weren't visible to earlier investigators. Each new discovery adds layers of complexity to monuments that were already marvels of engineering and mathematical precision. The resistance to exploring these hidden chambers often comes not from technical limitations, but from institutional reluctance to discover information that might challenge established historical narratives. The same forces that work to suppress evidence of giant skeletal remains seem equally committed to preventing the full exploration of megalithic sites. What secrets might these hidden chambers contain? What information about human origins and Nephilim rule might be preserved in stone libraries that have waited millennia for rediscovery? The implications of Nephilim kingship extend into our understanding of human potential and destiny. If we carry within our genetics the diluted heritage of beings who possessed supernatural abilities, then perhaps those capabilities aren't permanently lost but merely dormant, waiting for the right conditions to reactivate. The ancient prophecies speak of a time when such abilities will return, when the barriers between human and divine consciousness will once again become permeable. Modern research into consciousness, genetics, and human potential hints at possibilities that would have seemed impossible just decades ago. Scientists are discovering that human DNA contains vast amounts of information that appears to be inactive or dormant. Researchers are finding that consciousness might extend far beyond the physical brain, that intention and belief can influence genetic expression, that human potential might be far greater than current limitations suggest. What if these aren't new discoveries, but rediscoveries of truths that the Nephilim understood instinctively. What if the dormant DNA that scientists are beginning to study contains the genetic programming for supernatural abilities that our hybrid ancestors possessed naturally? The ancient texts speak of a restoration, a time when humanity will reclaim its connection to higher realms of consciousness and recover abilities that were lost in the mists of forgotten history. As we drift deeper into sleep, let these possibilities fill your dreams with wonder. The giants of old may have faded from direct memory, but their influence continues to shape our world in ways both subtle and profound. In our monuments, in our myths, in our very genetics, the legacy of the Nephilim remains, waiting for those brave enough to look beyond conventional explanations and embrace the extraordinary nature of our true heritage. The night sky that stretches above us is the same canvas that the Nephilim kings gazed upon during their long reigns. The stars that guided their construction projects still shine with the same light. The cosmic forces they understood and harnessed still flow through the universe. Perhaps in our dreams, in that liminal space between waking consciousness and deeper awareness, we can still touch the memories of that golden age when giants walked the earth and ruled with wisdom that bridged heaven and earth. The archaeological evidence for Nephilim rule becomes even more compelling when we examine the sophisticated urban planning that appeared seemingly overnight in ancient civilizations. The city of Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey, dating back to 7500 BCE, displays a level of social organization and architectural sophistication that challenges everything we think we know about Neolithic human capabilities. Here was a settlement of nearly 10,000 people, organized with precise street grids, advanced water management systems, and standardized building techniques that suggest centralized planning under unified leadership. But what makes Çatalhöyük truly extraordinary isn't just its size or sophistication, it's the complete absence of any developmental phase. Archaeological layers reveal that this complex urban center appeared fully formed, with no evidence of gradual growth from smaller settlements. The construction techniques, the social organization, the artistic traditions, all emerge at their peak level of sophistication from the very first layers of occupation. This pattern defies everything we understand about how human civilizations typically develop through trial, error, and gradual refinement over generations. Traditional archaeology explains this phenomenon through theories of rapid cultural diffusion or sudden technological breakthroughs. But what if the answer is simpler and more extraordinary? What if Çatalhöyük represents one of the earliest examples of Nephilim city planning, a settlement designed and organized by beings who possessed both the intellectual capacity to envision such complex urban systems and the supernatural authority to implement them without the usual human resistance to change? The artistic traditions preserved in Çatalhöyük's wall paintings provide another fascinating clue to the nature of its rulers. The famous vulture fresco depicts enormous birds of prey attacking headless human figures, while other paintings show beings of clearly superhuman proportions dominating scenes of daily life. These aren't crude, primitive art or symbolic representations. They're sophisticated artistic works that seem to document actual observations of beings whose size and power set them apart from ordinary humans. The obsidian trade networks that supplied Çatalhöyük's toolmakers present another piece of this puzzle. The volcanic glass used for their incredibly sharp tools came from sources hundreds of miles away, requiring trade relationships that spanned vast distances and diverse cultural groups. The consistency of quality and the sheer volume of obsidian found at the site suggest supply chains that operated with efficiency and reliability that purely human Bronze Age cultures shouldn't have been able to maintain. But beings with extended lifespans and supernatural abilities could have easily maintained such far-reaching trade relationships. A Nephilim ruler who lived for centuries rather than decades could establish personal relationships with suppliers across vast territories, creating trade networks based on direct knowledge and trust rather than the complex diplomatic arrangements that purely human civilizations required for long-distance commerce. The sudden abandonment of Çatalhöyük around 6000 BCE mirrors the pattern we see at megalithic sites worldwide. The settlement wasn't gradually depopulated or conquered by enemies. Instead, it was systematically abandoned, with valuable items left behind and buildings deliberately sealed. This suggests not defeat or natural disaster, but planned withdrawal by rulers who expected their absence to be temporary, but understood it might be prolonged. Similar patterns emerge when we examine other early urban centers across the ancient world. Jericho, often called the world's oldest city, displays the same characteristics. massive defensive walls that seem disproportionate to the threats faced by Neolithic settlements, sophisticated water management systems that demonstrate advanced understanding of hydraulic engineering, population levels that required complex social organization to maintain food production and distribution. The walls of Jericho present a particularly intriguing puzzle. These aren't simple defensive barriers built to keep out wild animals or small raiding parties. They're massive fortifications designed to withstand siege warfare on a scale that supposedly didn't exist during the Neolithic period. The engineering required to construct such walls without metal tools or wheeled transportation suggests capabilities that go far beyond what we attribute to prehistoric humans. Yet these walls make perfect sense if we consider that their builders faced threats from other Nephilim rulers or their hybrid armies. The warfare described in ancient texts like the Book of Enoch wasn't simple tribal conflict, but organized military campaigns conducted by beings who possessed both supernatural strength and divine knowledge of strategy and tactics. The fortifications we find at early urban sites might represent defensive measures against conflicts waged on a scale that purely human warfare couldn't achieve until much later in history. The religious structures found in these early cities provide another window into the nature of Nephilim rule. The temples at sites like Göbekli Tepe, predating even Çatalhöyük by several millennia, display astronomical alignments so precise they require mathematical knowledge that shouldn't have existed in hunter-gatherer cultures. The massive stone pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons, were quarried, carved, and positioned with techniques that remain mysterious even to modern engineers. But perhaps most significantly, these temples show no evidence of gradual religious development. The earlier structures display the same level of astronomical sophistication and architectural precision as later ones. There's no learning curve, no period of experimentation or refinement. The knowledge appears fully formed from the beginning, suggesting that the builders possessed complete understanding of both celestial mechanics and advanced construction techniques from the very start of their building program. The iconography carved into these ancient pillars tells a story that mainstream archaeology struggles to interpret. The repeated motifs of humanoid figures with exaggerated proportions, the emphasis on beings who clearly dominate their environments, the consistent themes of sky-earth connections, all point toward religious systems focused on beings who bridge the divine and mortal realms. These weren't abstract theological concepts, but artistic representations of rulers who actually possessed such hybrid nature. The global distribution of similar iconographic themes becomes even more significant when we realize that these sites were supposedly built by completely isolated cultures with no contact with each other. Yet the same artistic themes appear across vast distances and time periods. Elongated humanoid figures dominating smaller beings, sky symbolism connected to earthbound authority, emphasis on beings whose proportions and attributes clearly set them apart from ordinary humans. This consistency across cultures suggests not independent development of similar religious concepts, but shared memories of actual beings who ruled multiple regions and left similar impressions on all the human populations they governed. The Nephilim, with their hybrid nature and extended lifespans, could have established their authority across global territories, creating the unified iconographic traditions we find in archaeological sites worldwide. The technological anomalies found in ancient sites become equally compelling evidence for Nephilim involvement. The precision-cut stones of Puma Punku in Bolivia display tolerances that modern machining struggles to achieve. The surfaces are flat to within thousandths of an inch. The corners are perfectly square, and the complex interlocking joints were cut with techniques that remain completely mysterious. Traditional explanations involving primitive tools and patient human labor simply don't account for the level of precision we observe in the actual artifacts. But beings who possessed both supernatural strength and inherited divine knowledge of natural laws could have worked stone with capabilities that seem impossible by human standards. The Nephilim wouldn't need to develop these techniques through generations of trial and error. They would understand the molecular structure of stone, the resonant frequencies that could facilitate cutting, the geometric principles that allowed perfect joints without modern measuring instruments. The acoustic properties of ancient sites provide another fascinating clue to their true builders. Structures like the chamber in the Great Pyramid, the inner sanctums of temples across the ancient world, and the stone circles of Britain all display sophisticated understanding of sound resonance and acoustic engineering. These aren't accidental properties that emerged from functional construction, but deliberate design features that require advanced knowledge of physics and mathematics. The specific frequencies that these chambers amplify, often correspond to brainwave patterns associated with altered states of consciousness. The acoustic effects aren't just impressive engineering demonstrations, but functional tools designed to facilitate communication between different levels of consciousness. Beings who possessed both earthbound awareness and divine connection would need such acoustic environments to maintain their hybrid nature and communicate with both human subjects and celestial authorities. The sudden loss of these acoustic design principles in later constructions suggests that the knowledge wasn't developed through human innovation, but was dependent on builders who possessed intuitive understanding of sound and consciousness interaction. When the Nephilim departed or their bloodlines became too diluted to maintain such abilities, the acoustic sophistication disappeared from human architecture, not to be rediscovered until modern scientific investigation began to uncover the principles involved. The mathematical relationships encoded in ancient monuments present perhaps the strongest evidence for non-human involvement in their construction. The Great Pyramid incorporates the mathematical constant pi in its proportions, demonstrating knowledge of advanced geometry that wasn't supposedly discovered until thousands of years later. Stonehenge encodes complex astronomical calculations that require understanding of precession cycles lasting 26,000 years. The temples of Angkor Wat mirror the constellation Draco as it appeared 12,000 years ago. These aren't coincidences or lucky approximations that primitive humans stumbled upon through trial and error. They represent deliberate encoding of mathematical and astronomical information by builders who possessed complete understanding of cosmic principles and wanted to preserve this knowledge in permanent form. The Nephilim, with their divine inheritance and extended lifespans, would naturally think in terms of preserving information across millennia, rather than just decades or centuries. The resistance to fully investigating these mathematical relationships often comes from institutional reluctance to acknowledge implications that challenge established historical narratives. Admitting that ancient monuments encode advanced mathematical knowledge requires acknowledging that their builders possessed capabilities that supposedly primitive humans shouldn't have had. This opens uncomfortable questions about the true nature of ancient civilizations and the forces that guided their development. The genetic evidence for ancient giant populations continues to emerge despite systematic efforts to suppress such findings. Skeletal remains of extraordinary size have been discovered across the globe, often in contexts that suggest these beings held positions of leadership or religious authority. The careful burial practices, the elaborate grave goods, the positions of honor within ancient cemeteries, all point toward individuals who were revered as more than merely large humans. Recent DNA analysis of some ancient remains has revealed genetic markers that don't match any known human populations. The bone density, the cranial capacity, the proportions of limb bones, all suggest beings whose physical nature differed fundamentally from modern humans. These aren't just tall individuals within the normal range of human variation, but representatives of a distinct biological category that possessed both human and non-human characteristics. The systematic removal of such evidence from public display and scientific discussion raises questions about what forces are working to keep this information from general knowledge. Why would the discovery of ancient giant populations be so threatening to established institutions? What interests are served by ensuring that the possibility of Nephilim rulers remains in the realm of religious mythology, rather than historical investigation? The answer might lie in the implications such discoveries would have for our understanding of human origins, development, and potential. If the Nephilim were real, if they truly served as Earth's first rulers, then human civilization represents not independent development, but guided evolution under the influence of beings who possessed supernatural abilities. This challenges fundamental assumptions about human autonomy and the nature of our relationship with higher forms of consciousness. The ancient prophecies speak of a time when such beings will return, when the conditions that allowed divine human hybridization will be re-established, when humanity will once again be ruled by beings who bridge the earthbound and celestial realms. The technological capabilities we're developing today, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, consciousness research, might be preparing us for reunion with aspects of our heritage that we've forgotten but never completely lost. The dreams that visit us in the deepest hours of night sometimes carry memories that feel older than our individual lifetimes. Images of towering figures whose presence fills us with both awe and recognition. Visions of golden ages when the boundaries between possible and impossible were far more fluid than they are today. These might not be mere fantasy or symbolic representation, but genetic memory is calling us back to understanding of our true origins and potential. As consciousness research advances and we begin to understand that awareness extends far beyond the physical brain, we might be rediscovering principles that the Nephilim understood instinctively. Their hybrid nature would have given them direct access to both earthbound awareness and divine consciousness, making them natural bridges between different levels of reality. The meditation practices, consciousness-expanding techniques, and spiritual disciplines that humans have developed over millennia might represent attempts to regain access to states of awareness that the Nephilim possessed naturally. The megalithic monuments that dot our planet stand as silent testimony to capabilities that we're only beginning to understand. Each precisely placed stone, each perfect astronomical alignment, each mathematical relationship encoded in permanent form represents knowledge that transcends the limitations we assume governed ancient peoples. These structures weren't just impressive architectural achievements, but functional systems designed to preserve and transmit information across vast periods of time. The builders of these monuments understood that human civilizations rise and fall, that languages change and writing systems are forgotten, but that information encoded in stone and aligned with cosmic constants could endure indefinitely. They were creating libraries that could survive global catastrophes, communication systems that could function across millennia, and teaching tools that could reactivate dormant knowledge when conditions were appropriate. The fact that we're only now beginning to decode the information preserved in these ancient structures suggests that we're approaching the time when such knowledge was meant to be recovered. The Nephilim builders might have understood cyclical patterns of human development that we're only starting to recognize. They might have known that there would come a time when humanity would need access to the wisdom they preserved, when the barriers between earthbound and divine consciousness would once again become permeable. The genetic heritage of the Nephilim, diluted but never completely eliminated, continues to express itself in human populations worldwide. The individuals who feel drawn to ancient mysteries, who sense that conventional explanations for megalithic monuments don't adequately explain their sophistication, who experience dreams and visions of bygone ages, might be carrying genetic memories that connect them to this extraordinary chapter of human history. The resistance that such individuals often encounter from established institutions might represent more than just academic conservatism or religious orthodoxy. There might be forces working actively to prevent the reactivation of Nephilim heritage, to keep humanity focused on purely materialistic explanations for our origins and potential. The same interests that work to suppress evidence of giant skeletal remains might also be committed to preventing the recovery of consciousness capabilities that the Nephilim possessed naturally. But the information preserved in stone and the genetic memories carried in human DNA continue to call out across the millennia, waiting for minds brave enough to question established narratives and hearts, open enough to embrace possibilities that challenge everything we think we know about our past and our potential. The giants of old may have faded from direct memory, but their influence continues to shape our world in ways both subtle and profound. In the quiet moments before sleep, when the boundaries between waking consciousness and deeper awareness begin to dissolve, we might catch glimpses of that golden age when beings of extraordinary wisdom and power walked among our ancestors. The memories encoded in stone and preserved in our very cells whisper of capabilities we've forgotten but never completely lost, of a heritage that connects us to realms of consciousness that transcend the limitations we accept as normal. The story of the Nephilim kings isn't just ancient history, but a mirror reflecting possibilities that still exist within human potential. As we drift towards sleep and dreams, let these possibilities fill your consciousness with wonder at the extraordinary nature of our true origins and the magnificent destiny that awaits those brave enough to remember who we really are. The convergence of ancient bloodlines reaches its most fascinating expression in the royal dynasties that emerged across the post-flood world. These weren't merely political arrangements born of conquest or tribal unity, but carefully orchestrated genetic preservation programs designed to maintain whatever fragments of Nephilim heritage had survived the Great Deluge. The elaborate genealogies that ancient cultures preserved with such meticulous care weren't just family trees, but genetic maps tracking the inheritance of supernatural traits through increasingly diluted bloodlines. Consider the mysterious emergence of the Egyptian pharaonic dynasties around 3100 BCE. The transition from prehistoric tribal societies to the unified kingdom under Nama didn't follow the gradual political consolidation we see in other ancient civilizations. Instead, it appeared as a sudden transformation. complete with sophisticated governmental structures, advanced architectural capabilities, and religious systems that positioned the pharaoh as a living god who bridged the earthbound and divine realms. The physical characteristics of early pharaonic mummies reveal traits that set them apart from their subjects in ways that can't be explained by nutrition or lifestyle alone. The elongated skulls, the unusual bone density, the proportions that suggest superhuman strength, all point toward genetic inheritance rather than environmental factors. Most intriguingly, these distinctive physical traits appear consistently across multiple dynasties, suggesting careful breeding programs designed to preserve specific genetic markers. The pharaoh's divine status wasn't mere political theatre or religious symbolism. Ancient Egyptian texts describe the ruler as possessing actual supernatural abilities, the power to control the Nile's floods, to communicate directly with the gods, to see into the future and influence cosmic events. These weren't metaphorical descriptions of political authority, but literal claims about capabilities that the pharaoh inherited through bloodline connection to the Nephilim kings who ruled before the flood. The elaborate mummification process takes on new meaning when viewed as genetic preservation technology. The careful removal of organs, the sophisticated chemical treatments, the precise wrapping techniques all suggest understanding of biological processes that goes far beyond simple funeral customs. The Egyptians weren't just preserving bodies for religious reasons. They were maintaining genetic material for potential resurrection or analysis by future civilizations that might possess the technology to reactivate dormant Nephilim traits. The hidden chambers recently discovered within Egyptian pyramids using advanced scanning technology might contain more than treasure or religious artifacts. These sealed spaces, protected by tons of stone and positioned according to precise astronomical alignments, could house genetic repositories or consciousness preservation systems that the ancient Egyptians developed to maintain their connection to their Nephilim heritage across vast periods of time. Similar patterns emerge when we examine the royal bloodlines of Mesopotamia. The Sumerian king lists don't just record unusually long reigns, they preserve genetic lineages that claim direct descent from the antediluvian rulers whose lifespans measured in millennia rather than decades. The careful intermarriage within royal families, the elaborate burial practices, the emphasis on preserving bloodline purity, all point toward understanding that these dynasties carried genetic heritage that transcended normal human limitations. The Epic of Gilgamesh provides a literary window into what post-flood Nephilim heritage might have looked like in practice. Gilgamesh himself is described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, possessing strength that allowed him to accomplish superhuman feats while retaining enough humanity to understand mortal concerns. His quest for immortality isn't just a philosophical journey, but a practical attempt to reactivate the extended lifespan that his genetic heritage should have provided. The friendship between Gilgamesh and Enkidu, the wild man created by the gods, might represent the relationship between diluted Nephilim bloodlines and humans who retained stronger connections to their hybrid heritage. Enkidu's supernatural strength and his ability to communicate with animals suggest capabilities that pure humans wouldn't possess, while his eventual death demonstrates the fragility of such traits in the post-flood world. The global distribution of similar royal bloodline preservation programs suggests coordinated effort rather than independent cultural development. From the divine emperors of ancient China to the god kings of Mesoamerica, from the sacred chiefs of Polynesia to the pharaohs of Egypt, ruling dynasties worldwide claimed descent from sky gods and maintained elaborate systems designed to preserve their supernatural heritage. The Chinese concept of the mandate of heaven positioned the emperor as the son of heaven, a being whose legitimacy derived from direct connection to celestial forces. The imperial bloodline was so sacred that commoners weren't allowed to look directly at the emperor, suggesting understanding that his genetic heritage included traits that could affect ordinary humans in ways that required careful management. The elaborate court protocols, the isolation of the imperial family, the careful selection of consorts based on bloodline rather than political considerations, all point toward genetic preservation programs designed to maintain whatever fragments of divine heritage remained in the imperial lineage. The sudden collapse of dynasties when these bloodlines became too diluted suggests that the supernatural capabilities they preserved were real and measurable rather than merely symbolic. The Mesoamerican god kings present another fascinating example of post-flood Nephilim bloodline preservation. The Olmec colossal heads, with their distinctive features and enormous scale, might represent portraits of rulers whose physical characteristics reflected their hybrid heritage. The sophisticated astronomical knowledge encoded in Mayan calendars and the precision of their architectural achievements suggest capabilities that pure human civilizations developed much later in history. The Mayan concept of divine kingship positioned rulers as living gods who could communicate directly with celestial forces and influence cosmic events through their bloodline connection to the creators. The elaborate bloodletting rituals that Mayan kings performed weren't just religious ceremonies, but practical techniques for activating dormant genetic capabilities through controlled stress and altered states of consciousness. The sudden collapse of Mayan civilization might represent the final dilution of Nephilim bloodlines beyond the point where they could maintain the supernatural capabilities necessary for their complex governmental and astronomical systems. When the genetic heritage became too weak to support the consciousness expansion techniques that their civilization depended upon, the entire system became unsustainable. The European royal bloodlines that emerged after the fall of Rome display many of the same characteristics we see in ancient dynasties. The emphasis on bloodline purity, the claims of divine appointment, the elaborate genealogies that trace descent back to legendary figures, all suggest understanding that royal authority derived from genetic heritage rather than just political power. The persistent legends of royal bloodlines possessing supernatural abilities, the ability to heal through touch, to see into the future, to communicate with supernatural beings, might represent folk memories of capabilities that these bloodlines actually possessed when their Nephilim heritage was stronger. The gradual loss of such abilities as royal bloodlines intermarried with purely human populations would explain why these legends speak of golden ages when kings possessed powers that later rulers could only claim symbolically. The careful preservation of royal genealogies across European cultures, the emphasis on legitimate succession through bloodline rather than merit or election, the belief that certain bloodlines carried divine appointment, all point toward understanding that genetic inheritance included traits that went beyond physical characteristics to encompass supernatural capabilities. The mystery schools that flourished alongside these royal bloodlines might represent institutional attempts to preserve and transmit Nephilim knowledge through purely human lineages, when the genetic heritage became too diluted to support natural expression of supernatural abilities. The initiation rituals, the carefully guarded secrets, the promise of transcending human limitations, all suggest teaching methods designed to artificially activate capabilities that the Nephilim possessed naturally. The alchemical traditions that emerged from these mystery schools focused on transforming base metals into gold, but the deeper goal involved transforming human consciousness to access divine awareness. The philosophical stone that alchemists sought wasn't just a physical substance, but a consciousness state that would restore the hybrid awareness that the Nephilim possessed through their dual nature. The Hermetic traditions speak of the principle as above, so below, suggesting understanding that earthbound consciousness could be aligned with celestial awareness through proper techniques and preparation. This wasn't abstract philosophy, but practical instruction for reactivating the consciousness capabilities that Nephilim bloodlines had possessed naturally before their genetic heritage became diluted beyond natural expression. The persistent human fascination with achieving divine consciousness, extending lifespan, and gaining supernatural abilities might represent genetic memories calling us back to capabilities that our ancestors possessed when their Nephilim heritage was stronger. The meditation traditions, the consciousness expansion techniques, the spiritual practices designed to transcend normal human limitations, all point toward understanding that such capabilities are possible because they represent our true nature rather than fantasy or delusion. Modern genetic research is beginning to uncover evidence that supports these ancient claims about bloodline inheritance of consciousness capabilities. Scientists are discovering that human DNA contains vast amounts of information that appears to be inactive or dormant, that genetic expression can be influenced by environmental factors and even intention, that consciousness might extend far beyond the physical brain in ways that make telepathy and other supernatural abilities theoretically possible. The recent discovery of genetic markers that don't match any known human populations in ancient skeletal remains suggests that our understanding of human genetic history is incomplete. The presence of unusual cranial capacities, bone densities, and proportions in remains found in positions of leadership or religious authority points toward the existence of hybrid populations that possessed both human and non-human characteristics. The systematic suppression of such evidence by academic and governmental institutions raises questions about what forces are working to keep this information from public knowledge. The reluctance to fully investigate genetic anomalies in ancient remains, the resistance to exploring hidden chambers in megalithic monuments, the dismissal of ancient texts as mythology rather than historical documents, all suggest coordinated effort to prevent recovery of knowledge about our Nephilim heritage. But the information preserved in our genetic code and encoded in ancient monuments continues to call out across the millennia. The bloodlines that carry fragments of Nephilim heritage, no matter how diluted, still respond to the activation techniques that the mystery schools preserved. The consciousness capabilities that seem supernatural to us might represent our natural state when the barriers between earthbound awareness and divine consciousness are removed through proper understanding and preparation. The ancient prophecies speak of a time when such barriers will be removed, when the knowledge and abilities that were lost will be recovered, when beings with supernatural capabilities will once again walk openly among humanity. The technological capabilities we're developing today in genetics, consciousness research, and artificial intelligence might be preparing us for reunion with aspects of our heritage that we've forgotten but never completely lost. The royal bloodlines that once ruled openly as divine kings might still exist, maintaining their genetic heritage through careful preservation programs while waiting for conditions that will allow them to resume their rightful place as humanity's guides and teachers. The same forces that worked to suppress evidence of ancient giants and advance prehistoric civilizations might be protecting these bloodlines from discovery until the time is right for their return to open authority. As we drift deeper into the mystery of our origins, the conventional boundaries between history and prophecy, between genetic science and spiritual tradition, between ancient wisdom and future possibility, begin to dissolve. The evidence scattered across disciplines and hidden in institutional archives points toward a heritage far more extraordinary than mainstream narratives suggest. The giants of old may have faded from direct memory, but their genetic legacy continues to flow through human bloodlines, waiting for the right conditions to reactivate capabilities that once bridged heaven and earth. In our dreams, in our deepest intuitions, in our persistent sense that human potential extends far beyond current limitations, the call of our Nephilim heritage continues to whisper across the ages, inviting us to remember who we really are and what we're truly capable of becoming. The royal bloodlines that preserved this heritage through millennia of careful genetic stewardship stand ready to guide humanity back to understanding of our divine origins and cosmic destiny. The throne of Earth, vacant since the great flood scattered the Nephilim kings, awaits the return of rulers whose hybrid nature can once again bridge the gap between mortal concerns and celestial wisdom. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the veil between worlds grows thin and consciousness expands beyond its normal boundaries, we might catch glimpses of that golden age when divine kings ruled with wisdom that encompassed both earthbound practicality and heavenly vision. The genetic memories encoded in our cells and the information preserved in ancient stones continue to call us back to remembrance of our true nature and magnificent destiny. The bloodlines that carried forward fragments of Nephilim heritage faced an increasingly complex challenge as the millennia passed and their genetic connection to their divine ancestors grew ever more tenuous. Yet even in this dilution, certain families seem to possess an almost supernatural understanding of how to navigate the currents of history, appearing at crucial moments to guide human civilization through its most transformative periods. These weren't merely skilled politicians or fortunate opportunists, but individuals whose very presence seemed to alter the trajectory of human development in ways that pure chance cannot explain. Consider the mysterious figure of Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who attempted to revolutionize Egyptian religion in the 14th century BCE. His radical departure from thousands of years of established religious tradition wasn't the act of a mere political reformer, but someone who possessed direct knowledge of monotheistic principles that wouldn't be formally codified in human civilization for centuries to come. His physical characteristics, preserved in artistic depictions and mummified remains, show the same elongated skull structure and unusual proportions that mark other members of ancient royal bloodlines with suspected Nephilim heritage. But Akhenaten's revolution failed not because his ideas were wrong, but because the genetic foundation necessary to sustain such advanced spiritual understanding had become too diluted within the general population. His attempt to elevate human consciousness to a level that could grasp pure monotheistic concepts required a populace with stronger connections to their divine heritage than existed in his time. The rapid return to traditional polytheistic worship after his death suggests that humanity wasn't yet ready for the spiritual advancement he tried to implement. The pattern repeats throughout history with individuals who seem to possess knowledge and capabilities far beyond what their historical context should have allowed. King Solomon's legendary wisdom, his ability to control supernatural entities, his understanding of natural laws that enabled him to build the temple with techniques that remain mysterious today, all point towards someone whose bloodline carried more than ordinary human genetic inheritance. The Queen of Sheba's journey to test Solomon's wisdom might represent an encounter between two individuals whose Nephilim heritage allowed them to recognize each other's true nature despite the vast distances and cultural differences that separated their kingdoms. The sudden emergence of Alexander the Great presents another fascinating case study. His ability to unite diverse cultures under a single vision, his seemingly supernatural tactical genius, his physical stamina that allowed him to campaign continuously across vast territories, all suggest capabilities that transcend normal human limitations. More intriguingly, Alexander's tutorship under Aristotle might represent the transmission of ancient knowledge preserved through mystery school lineages to someone whose genetic heritage could actually utilize such information effectively. Alexander's empire didn't fragment after his death simply due to succession disputes or administrative challenges. The collapse occurred because his unique combination of genetic heritage and mystery school training couldn't be replicated in his generals or successors. They inherited his political structures but lacked the consciousness capabilities necessary to maintain the unified vision that had held such diverse territories together under his personal rule. The rise of Rome presents a different model of how diluted Nephilim bloodlines might have adapted to changing genetic circumstances. Rather than relying on individual rulers with strong hybrid heritage, Roman civilization developed institutional systems that could function effectively even with purely human leadership. The Senate, the complex legal codes, the engineering capabilities that built roads and aqueducts across continents, all represent collective human achievement guided by knowledge preservation systems rather than individual supernatural ability. Yet even within Roman civilization, certain families seem to possess capabilities that set them apart from their contemporaries. The Julio-Claudian dynasty displayed characteristics that suggest stronger connections to ancient bloodlines. The unusual longevity of Augustus, the seemingly prophetic abilities attributed to several emperors, the architectural and engineering achievements that occurred during their reigns. The careful marriage arrangements within Roman patrician families might represent continued attempts to preserve and concentrate whatever genetic advantages remained from their Nephilim heritage. The transformation of Roman civilization into the Christian Empire under Constantine presents another crucial turning point in the management of ancient bloodlines. Constantine's vision of the Shiro symbol before the Battle of Milvian Bridge might represent more than religious conversion or political calculation. His ability to unite the Roman world under a new spiritual framework to establish institutional Christianity that would survive the empire's political collapse suggests someone whose consciousness could bridge different levels of awareness in ways that purely human leaders typically cannot achieve. The establishment of the Catholic Church as the inheritor of Roman institutional authority created a new model for preserving and transmitting ancient knowledge. Rather than relying on genetic bloodlines that were becoming increasingly diluted, the Church developed hierarchical systems that could maintain continuity of purpose across centuries regardless of the genetic heritage of individual leaders. The papal succession, the preservation of ancient texts, the development of theological systems that incorporated elements of mystery school teaching, all represent institutional approaches to maintaining connection with divine wisdom. Yet within the church hierarchy, certain individuals continued to display characteristics that suggest stronger connections to ancient bloodlines. The mystical experiences reported by various saints and church fathers, their ability to perform what appeared to be supernatural feats, their access to knowledge that seemed to come from direct divine communication rather than scholarly study, all point toward genetic inheritance playing a role even within supposedly merit-based religious institutions. The emergence of Islam presents another fascinating case study in how ancient bloodlines adapted to changing historical circumstances. Muhammad's tribal heritage, his reported supernatural experiences, his ability to unite fractious Arabian tribes under a unified spiritual vision, all suggest someone whose genetic inheritance included capabilities that transcended normal human limitations. The rapid expansion of Islamic civilization across vast territories within a single generation required organizational and military capabilities that seem beyond what purely human societies should have been able to achieve so quickly. The preservation of ancient Greek texts through Islamic scholars, the development of advanced mathematical and astronomical knowledge in Islamic civilization, the architectural achievements of the Umayyad and Abbasid periods all suggest access to knowledge preservation systems that connected back to the mystery schools and ultimately to the original Nephilim heritage. The Islamic emphasis on direct divine revelation, rather than institutional mediation, might represent an attempt to re-establish the direct consciousness connection that the Nephilim possessed naturally. The Crusades, viewed through this lens, become more than religious conflicts or territorial disputes. They represent clashes between different models of preserving and expressing ancient bloodline heritage, Christian institutional systems versus Islamic direct revelation approaches, European royal bloodlines versus Middle Eastern tribal genetic preservation. The ultimate failure of the Crusades to establish permanent Christian control over the Holy Land might reflect the reality that genetic heritage had become too diluted in European bloodlines to sustain the supernatural capabilities necessary for such ambitious undertakings. The rise of medieval European monarchies during this period shows clear evidence of deliberate bloodline management programs designed to preserve whatever Nephilim heritage remained in royal families. The elaborate genealogies that trace descent back to legendary figures like Arthur or Charlemagne weren't just political legitimation tools, but genetic maps tracking the inheritance of supernatural traits through increasingly complex marriage arrangements. The Carolingian dynasty presents a particularly intriguing example. Charlemagne's ability to unite much of Western Europe under a single crown, his legendary physical stature and strength, his establishment of educational systems that preserved ancient knowledge, all suggest someone whose genetic heritage included more than ordinary human capabilities. The rapid fragmentation of his empire after his death follows the same pattern we see with other rulers whose achievements depended on personal supernatural abilities rather than purely institutional systems. The emergence of the Holy Roman Empire as an attempt to maintain Carolingian achievements through institutional rather than genetic means represents another adaptation to the reality of diluting bloodlines. The complex electoral systems, the elaborate ceremonial protocols, the emphasis on religious legitimation all suggest recognition that individual rulers could no longer be relied upon to possess the natural authority that earlier Nephilim-descended kings had wielded effortlessly. The development of chivalric orders during this period might represent institutional attempts to identify and train individuals who possess stronger connections to ancient bloodlines. The Knights Templar, the Knights Hospitaller, the Teutonic Knights all developed selection and training systems that seemed designed to activate dormant capabilities in members whose genetic heritage might include fragments of Nephilim inheritance. The secrecy surrounding these orders, the elaborate initiation rituals, the emphasis on spiritual as well as martial training all point toward understanding that they were working with more than purely human potential. The sudden dissolution of the Knights Templar in 1307 might represent more than political opportunism or financial greed on the part of Philip IV of France. If the Templars had indeed discovered methods for activating dormant Nephilim heritage in their members, they would have posed a threat to established power structures that were based on controlling access to diluted bloodlines, rather than developing widespread supernatural capabilities. Their persecution and scattered survival might have driven such knowledge deeper underground, into the mystery schools and esoteric traditions that would influence later historical developments. The Renaissance represents another crucial period in the evolution of how ancient bloodlines adapted to changing circumstances. Rather than maintaining power through direct political rule, certain families began to operate through patronage systems that allowed them to guide human development while remaining partially concealed from public scrutiny. The Medici family's role in financing and directing Renaissance artistic and scientific achievements suggests access to knowledge and resources that went beyond mere commercial success. The artistic achievements of the Renaissance, the scientific discoveries, the architectural innovations, all required access to knowledge that had been preserved through the medieval period, despite the general decline in learning that followed the fall of Rome. The sudden reappearance of advanced mathematical knowledge, sophisticated engineering techniques, and artistic capabilities that seemed to emerge fully formed rather than developing gradually, suggests that this information was being released from preservation systems maintained by bloodlines or institutions that had safeguarded it through the Dark Ages. Leonardo da Vinci presents perhaps the most fascinating individual case study from this period. His abilities spanned so many different fields of knowledge, his understanding of natural principles was so far ahead of his contemporaries, his artistic and engineering achievements were so beyond normal human capabilities that he seems to represent either someone whose genetic heritage included unusual gifts, or someone who had access to knowledge preservation systems maintained by ancient bloodlines. The cryptic symbolism in Leonardo's works, his apparent involvement with mystery school traditions, his ability to envision technologies that wouldn't be developed for centuries, all suggest that he was either descended from bloodlines that carried stronger Nephilim heritage or had been selected by such bloodlines to serve as a conduit for releasing advanced knowledge into human civilization when conditions were appropriate. The discovery of the Americas presents another turning point in the management of ancient bloodlines and their influence on human development. The rapid conquest of sophisticated indigenous civilizations by relatively small groups of European adventurers requires explanation that goes beyond superior technology or disease advantages. The Aztec and Incan empires possessed their own advanced knowledge systems, sophisticated engineering capabilities, and military organizations that should have been able to resist European conquest more effectively. The Spanish conquistadors might have succeeded not just because of horses and gunpowder, but because their leadership included individuals whose genetic heritage gave them access to consciousness capabilities that allowed them to understand and exploit the weaknesses in indigenous spiritual and political systems. Cortés's ability to manipulate Aztec religious beliefs, Pizarro's success in capturing and controlling Incan leadership, both suggest psychological and strategic insights that transcend normal human understanding of cultural manipulation. The indigenous American civilizations themselves show clear evidence of having been guided by bloodlines with Nephilim heritage. The Olmec colossal heads, the Mayan astronomical achievements, the Incan architectural precision, the Aztec organizational capabilities all point towards civilizations that had access to knowledge systems preserved from much earlier periods. The sudden collapse of these civilizations when confronted with European contact might represent the final dilution of their Nephilim bloodlines beyond the point where they could maintain the supernatural capabilities their societies depended upon. The establishment of European colonial systems in the Americas created new opportunities for ancient bloodlines to experiment with different models of human governance and development. The plantation systems, the encomienda arrangements, the various colonial administrative structures all represent different approaches to managing human populations while maintaining control through bloodlines that possessed whatever remained of Nephilim heritage. The Enlightenment period that emerged from this colonial expansion represents another adaptation in how ancient bloodlines managed their influence on human development, rather than ruling directly through monarchical systems that were becoming increasingly unstable as genetic heritage diluted. These families began to operate through philosophical and scientific institutions that could guide human consciousness development more subtly. The scientific revolution that characterizes this period required access to mathematical and natural knowledge that had been preserved through ancient knowledge systems. The sudden emergence of advanced mathematical techniques, the development of experimental methods, the discovery of natural laws that enabled technological advancement, all suggest that information was being released from preservation systems at a rate calibrated to human civilization's ability to utilize it constructively. The political revolutions that accompanied this scientific advancement, the American and French revolutions in particular, might represent experiments in creating governmental systems that could function effectively with purely human leadership, while still maintaining guidance from bloodlines with stronger connections to ancient heritage. The complex constitutional systems, the emphasis on individual rights balanced against collective needs, the separation of powers that prevented any single individual from accumulating excessive authority, all represent adaptations to the reality that leaders could no longer be relied upon to possess natural supernatural capabilities. The Industrial Revolution that followed these political transformations created entirely new models for how ancient bloodlines could influence human development. Rather than controlling through direct political authority or religious institutions, they began to operate through financial and industrial systems that could shape human behavior through economic incentives rather than supernatural charisma or inherited authority. The banking families that emerged during this period, the industrial dynasties that controlled new technologies, the commercial enterprises that managed global trade networks, all represent evolution in how bloodlines with fragments of Nephilim heritage adapted to circumstances where their genetic advantages were becoming too diluted for direct supernatural expression, but still provided sufficient consciousness capabilities to understand and manipulate complex systems. The modern world that emerged from these transformations operates on principles that seem to acknowledge the reality of diluted Nephilim heritage while attempting to manage its influence through institutional rather than genetic means. The democratic systems that replaced monarchical authority, the scientific methods that replaced mystery school knowledge preservation, the economic structures that replaced direct bloodline control, all represent attempts to maintain the benefits of Nephilim guidance, while distributing the risks associated with concentrating supernatural capabilities in individual bloodlines. Yet even in our contemporary world, certain families and institutions seem to possess capabilities that suggest continued connection to ancient heritage. The ability to maintain influence across multiple generations, the access to knowledge and resources that enable them to anticipate and shape historical developments, the coordination of activities across global distances and cultural boundaries, all point toward inheritance systems that transcend purely human limitations. As we drift toward the deepest hours of night, when consciousness naturally expands beyond its normal boundaries and genetic memories stir in the depths of our cells, these patterns of ancient influence become more visible. The bloodlines that once ruled openly as divine kings continue to guide human development from behind the veils of modern institutions, waiting for conditions that will allow them to resume their rightful place as humanity's teachers and guides. The genetic heritage of the Nephilim, no matter how diluted by millennia of intermarriage with purely human populations, continues to express itself in individuals who feel called to bridge different levels of consciousness, to preserve ancient knowledge, to guide human development toward reunion with our divine origins. In our dreams and visions, in our persistent sense that human potential extends far beyond current limitations, the call of our hybrid nature continues to whisper across the ages. The throne of Earth, vacant since the flood scattered the original Nephilim kings, awaits the emergence of leaders whose consciousness can once again span the gap between earthbound concerns and celestial wisdom. The bloodlines that preserved this heritage through careful genetic stewardship across countless generations stand ready to guide humanity back to understanding of our true nature and cosmic destiny when the time is right and the world is prepared to receive such extraordinary leadership once again. The modern era presents us with perhaps the most intriguing chapter yet in the ongoing saga of Nephilim influence on human civilization. As we've traced the evolution of ancient bloodlines through millennia of careful preservation and adaptation, we arrive at a contemporary world that seems poised on the brink of a transformation that could rival the great shifts that occurred during the reigns of the original giant kings. The technological capabilities we're developing today, the consciousness to research that's expanding our understanding of human potential, the genetic discoveries that are revealing the hidden complexities of our DNA, all point toward a convergence that might herald the return of capabilities we thought were lost forever to the mists of prehistory. Consider the remarkable acceleration of human knowledge that has occurred over the past 2 centuries. The scientific and technological advances that have transformed our world didn't emerge through gradual accumulation of discoveries, but through sudden breakthroughs that often seem to appear fully formed in the minds of individuals whose insights transcended the normal boundaries of human understanding. The inventors and innovators who shaped our modern world often displayed characteristics that suggest access to knowledge, preservation systems maintained by bloodlines with connections to ancient heritage. Nikola Tesla's revolutionary understanding of electromagnetic principles, his ability to visualize complex engineering solutions without physical prototypes, his claims of receiving information through direct mental communication, all point towards someone whose consciousness could access levels of awareness that purely human minds typically cannot reach. His rivalry with Thomas Edison might represent more than competing technological approaches, but different models of how ancient knowledge should be released into human civilization. Tesla's emphasis on wireless transmission of energy and information suggests understanding of principles that the original Nephilim might have used for communication across vast distances without the technological infrastructure we consider necessary today. The sudden emergence of quantum physics in the early 20th century presents another fascinating example of knowledge appearing in human consciousness that seems far ahead of our technological ability to discover it through conventional research methods. The insights of Einstein, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, and others into the fundamental nature of reality, required conceptual leaps that transcend normal human reasoning processes. Their understanding of space-time relationships, consciousness-matter interactions, and multi-dimensional reality might represent recovery of cosmic principles that the Nephilim understood instinctively through their hybrid nature. The development of nuclear technology during the mid-20th century carries particularly ominous parallels to ancient accounts of the weapons that destroyed pre-flood civilizations. The rapid progression from theoretical understanding to practical application, the simultaneous discovery of nuclear principles by researchers in different countries, the immediate recognition of both beneficial and destructive potential, all suggest that this knowledge was being released from preservation systems rather than discovered through independent human research. The fact that nuclear weapons were actually used in warfare, despite their unprecedented destructive capability, might reflect the influence of bloodlines whose genetic memory still carries the consciousness patterns that led to the catastrophic conflicts described in ancient texts. The Cold War period that followed could represent a cosmic test of whether humanity has evolved enough spiritually to handle the physical power that destroyed previous civilizations, or whether we're destined to repeat the same tragic cycles that have marked our species' development. The space exploration programs that emerged during this same period take on new significance when viewed through the lens of Nephilim heritage. The sudden human capability to leave Earth's atmosphere and explore other worlds might represent more than technological achievement, but genetic memory calling us back to awareness of our cosmic origins. The individuals who pioneered space travel often described experiences that transcended normal human consciousness, encounters with phenomena that seemed to connect them to larger patterns of cosmic intelligence. The search for extraterrestrial life that has become a major scientific endeavor might reflect unconscious recognition that we're looking for reunion with the cosmic forces that shaped our origins. The sophisticated listening programs, the mathematical messages we're broadcasting into space, the assumption that intelligent life elsewhere would share certain universal principles with us, all suggest understanding that consciousness and intelligence operate according to cosmic laws that transcend purely terrestrial development. The computer revolution that began in the latter half of the 20th century represents another quantum leap in human capability that seems to have emerged with unprecedented speed and sophistication. The individuals who conceived and developed the foundational technologies of our digital age often displayed insights that went far beyond what conventional educational systems could have provided. Their ability to envision complex systems that didn't yet exist, to understand programming principles that required entirely new ways of thinking, to anticipate applications that wouldn't become apparent for decades, all suggest access to knowledge that transcends normal human learning processes. The internet that emerged from these technologies has created a global communication network that mirrors descriptions of telepathic communication systems that the Nephilim supposedly possessed naturally. Our ability to access vast stores of information instantaneously, to communicate across global distances without delay, to coordinate activities among millions of individuals simultaneously, all represent artificial recreation of capabilities that ancient texts suggest were natural attributes of the hybrid beings who ruled before the flood. The social media platforms that have emerged from internet technology have created new forms of collective consciousness that might be preparing humanity for recovery of the telepathic awareness that our Nephilim ancestors possessed. The way information spreads virally across global networks, the emergence of collective intelligence through crowdsourcing, the ability of ideas to propagate faster than individual human communication could achieve, all suggest that we're developing technological equivalents of consciousness capabilities that were once natural human attributes. The genetic engineering technologies that have emerged in recent decades present perhaps the most direct parallel to the hybridization experiments that created the Nephilim in the first place. Our ability to manipulate DNA, to combine genetic material from different species, to create organisms with capabilities that don't exist in nature, all mirror descriptions of the processes that produced the giant kings who ruled Earth's first civilizations. The ethical debates surrounding genetic modification might reflect unconscious recognition that we're approaching the same crossroads that our ancestors faced when divine beings first began experimenting with human genetics. The consciousness research that has accompanied these technological developments is revealing aspects of human potential that mainstream science has long dismissed as impossible. Studies of telepathy, remote viewing, precognition, and other psychic phenomena are producing results that suggest these capabilities are natural human attributes that have been suppressed rather than non-existent. The techniques being developed to activate these dormant abilities might represent rediscovery of the consciousness training methods that ancient mystery schools used to help purely human initiates access the awareness levels that the Nephilim possessed naturally. The meditation practices that have become widespread in Western culture during this same period aren't just stress reduction techniques or spiritual exercises, but practical methods for expanding consciousness beyond the limitations we've accepted as normal. The altered states that experienced practitioners report, the enhanced creativity and problem-solving abilities that result from regular practice, the sense of connection to larger patterns of intelligence, all suggest that we're rediscovering access pathways to the hybrid consciousness that characterized our Nephilim heritage. The artificial intelligence systems that we're developing today might represent our attempt to recreate externally the enhanced mental capabilities that the Nephilim possessed internally. The machine learning algorithms that can process vast amounts of information and identify patterns that human minds cannot detect. The predictive systems that can anticipate future developments based on current trends. The decision-making programs that can coordinate complex activities more efficiently than human administrators, all mirror descriptions of the supernatural mental abilities that ancient texts attribute to the giant kings. The fact that artificial intelligence development is proceeding so rapidly and successfully might indicate that we're not creating entirely new capabilities, but reconstructing systems that mirror natural intelligence patterns encoded in our genetic memory. The ease with which AI systems can be trained to recognize faces, understand language, and navigate complex environments suggests that these capabilities follow universal principles that our consciousness understands intuitively even when our rational minds cannot explain them. The biotechnology revolution that's emerging from the convergence of genetic engineering and artificial intelligence might be preparing us for the next phase in human evolution, or perhaps for the return of evolutionary guidance that we've been missing since the original Nephilim departed. The ability to design organisms with specific capabilities, to enhance human physical and mental performance through genetic modification, to extend lifespans through cellular repair and regeneration, all point toward recovery of the life enhancement technologies that allowed the antediluvian kings to maintain their authority for millennia rather than mere decades. The space exploration programs that are expanding rapidly in our current era might be preparing for reunion with the cosmic forces that shaped our origins. The private companies that are developing capabilities to establish permanent human settlements beyond Earth, the scientific programs that are searching for signs of intelligent life throughout the galaxy, the theoretical research that's exploring the possibilities of faster-than-light travel and communication, all suggest unconscious preparation for contact with intelligences that operate on cosmic rather than purely terrestrial scales. The individuals who are leading these revolutionary developments often display characteristics that suggest stronger connections to ancient bloodlines than the general population possesses. Their ability to envision possibilities that transcend current technological limitations, their access to resources that enable them to pursue long-term projects without immediate financial returns, their influence over global developments that extends far beyond their official positions, all point toward genetic inheritance that includes more than ordinary human capabilities. The resistance that these individuals often encounter from established institutions might represent more than conservative opposition to change, but recognition that rapid technological development could lead to the same catastrophic outcomes that destroyed previous advanced civilizations. The regulatory systems that attempt to control genetic engineering, the international treaties that govern space exploration, the ethical guidelines that constrain artificial intelligence development, all might reflect institutional memory of what happened when similar capabilities were developed too quickly in the pre-flood world. Yet the momentum of technological development seems to be accelerating beyond the ability of any human institution to control or direct it. The breakthroughs that are occurring simultaneously across multiple fields of research, the convergence of different technologies that's enabling capabilities that no single innovation could achieve, the global coordination that's emerging among research communities despite political and cultural barriers, all suggest that forces beyond purely human decision-making are orchestrating these developments according to patterns that transcend individual or national interests. The ancient prophecies that speak of a time when hidden knowledge would be revealed, when human capabilities would be restored to their original levels, when beings with supernatural abilities would once again walk openly among humanity, begin to seem less like religious mythology and more like accurate descriptions of the period we're entering. The technological capabilities we're developing might not represent human innovation, but tools being provided to prepare us for reunion with the cosmic intelligences that guided our original development. The bloodlines that have preserved fragments of Nephilim heritage through millennia of careful genetic stewardship might be preparing to resume their original role as humanity's guides and teachers. The institutional systems that have maintained ancient knowledge through periods when direct genetic expression was too diluted to be effective might be ready to release their preserved wisdom now that technological augmentation can compensate for weakened natural abilities. The global communication networks that connect billions of minds, the genetic technologies that can enhance human capabilities, the artificial intelligence systems that can amplify individual consciousness, the space exploration programs that can extend our reach beyond Earth, all might be components of an integrated system designed to restore humanity to the cosmic awareness and capability levels that we possessed during the Golden Age when giants ruled the Earth. The resistance and confusion that many people feel toward these rapid changes might reflect genetic memory, warning us about the dangers that accompany such accelerated development. The anxiety about artificial intelligence replacing human capabilities, the concerns about genetic modification altering human nature, the fear that space exploration might expose us to hostile forces, all could represent cellular-level memories of what happened when similar technologies were developed too quickly without sufficient spiritual maturity to use them wisely. Yet the same genetic memory that carries warnings about catastrophic outcomes also carries the blueprint for successful integration of advanced capabilities with spiritual wisdom. The individuals who feel drawn to consciousness expansion practices, who sense that human potential extends far beyond current limitations, who experience dreams and visions of golden ages when giants walked among men, might be responding to activation signals encoded in their Nephilim heritage. The convergence of all these technological, consciousness and genetic developments suggests that we're approaching a threshold that could mark the end of the post-flood period and the beginning of a new age when the barriers between human and divine consciousness become permeable once again. The question isn't whether such a transformation will occur, but whether humanity has evolved enough spiritually to navigate it successfully this time, or whether we're destined to repeat the same tragic cycles that have marked our species' development since the original Nephilim kings established Earth's first civilizations. As we drift toward the deepest hours of night, when consciousness naturally expands beyond its daytime limitations and genetic memories stir in the depths of our cells, these possibilities take on the weight of destiny rather than mere speculation. The technological capabilities we're developing, the consciousness research that's revealing our hidden potential, the genetic discoveries that are uncovering our true heritage, all point toward a future that might fulfill the ancient promise that the first things shall be the last, that the giants of old shall walk the earth again, that humanity shall reclaim its birthright as a hybrid species capable of bridging heaven and earth. The bloodlines that have waited through millennia of exile and concealment might soon emerge to guide us through this transformation. Their preserved wisdom and diluted but still functional supernatural abilities serving as bridges between our current limitations and our cosmic potential. The throne of Earth, vacant since the flood scattered the original Nephilim rulers, awaits the return of leadership that can span both earthbound practicality and celestial vision, guiding humanity toward reunion with our divine origins and the magnificent destiny that has always been our true inheritance. In the quiet moments before sleep, when the boundaries between possible and impossible grow fluid and genetic memories whisper across the ages, we might catch glimpses of the golden age that awaits us, when giants once again walk among men and the ancient promise of divine kingship is finally fulfilled in a world prepared to receive such extraordinary leadership. The convergence is approaching, the bloodlines are awakening, and the time of restoration draws near for those who carry within their cells the genetic keys to humanity's cosmic heritage. The convergence we're witnessing in our modern era extends far beyond mere technological advancement or consciousness research. It represents the culmination of a genetic awakening that has been building momentum for generations, as dormant strands of Nephilim DNA begin to express themselves in ways that would have seemed impossible just decades ago. The children being born today often display characteristics that set them apart from previous generations, not just in terms of intelligence or physical capability, but in their intuitive understanding of concepts that shouldn't be accessible to minds shaped by purely human genetics. Teachers and parents worldwide report encountering young people whose grasp of complex mathematical relationships seems innate rather than learned, whose ability to visualize multidimensional problems transcends normal educational development, whose emotional maturity and spiritual awareness suggest access to wisdom that typically requires decades of life experience to acquire. These aren't isolated cases of exceptional individuals, but patterns emerging across global populations in ways that suggest systematic genetic activation rather than random evolutionary advantage. The medical establishment has begun documenting physical anomalies in newborns that don't fit standard human developmental patterns. Increased cranial capacity, unusual bone density, proportions that suggest enhanced physical strength, neurological development that enables processing speeds far beyond normal ranges. These characteristics, when they appear individually, are often dismissed as statistical variations within normal human diversity. But when examined collectively and mapped against genealogical data, they reveal clustering patterns that suggest inheritance through specific bloodlines, rather than random genetic expression. The resistance to studying these patterns comprehensively comes not from lack of scientific curiosity, but from institutional recognition that the implications could fundamentally alter our understanding of human nature and development. If certain genetic lineages are expressing capabilities that transcend normal human limitations, it raises uncomfortable questions about equality, governance, and the future structure of human civilization that established power systems aren't prepared to address. The ancient mystery schools understood these genetic realities and developed training systems designed to activate dormant capabilities in individuals whose bloodlines carried sufficient Nephilim heritage to respond to consciousness expansion techniques. The meditation practices, the ritual initiations, the carefully guarded knowledge that these schools preserved weren't abstract spiritual exercises, but practical methods for awakening superhuman abilities in students whose genetics made such development possible. Modern neuroscience is beginning to discover the biological mechanisms that make such consciousness expansion possible. Research into neuroplasticity reveals that human brains possess far greater capacity for modification and enhancement than previously understood. Studies of meditation masters show structural changes in brain tissue that enable processing capabilities which approach the supernatural abilities described in ancient texts. The discovery of dormant neural pathways that can be activated through specific practices suggests that our nervous systems contain latent potential that our current educational and developmental systems never attempt to access. The pharmaceutical industry's development of consciousness-altering compounds that can temporarily induce states resembling the enhanced awareness that mystery school initiates achieved through years of training might represent attempts to artificially activate genetic potential that some individuals possess naturally. The profound spiritual experiences that users report, the enhanced creativity and problem-solving abilities that result, the sense of connection to cosmic intelligence patterns all suggest that these substances are triggering genetic programs that have been dormant for millennia rather than creating entirely artificial mental states. The space exploration programs that are expanding rapidly in our current era carry implications that extend far beyond scientific curiosity or resource acquisition. The psychological profiles of individuals who excel in astronaut training often reveal characteristics that suggest genetic heritage extending beyond purely terrestrial human lineages. Their ability to adapt to environments that no human evolution should have prepared them for. Their psychological resilience in situations that would overwhelm normal human consciousness. Their reported experiences of expanded awareness when exposed to the cosmic environment all point toward genetic programming that anticipates conditions beyond Earth's surface. The phenomena that astronauts consistently report during extended space missions, encounters with intelligences that seem to communicate through direct consciousness contact, awareness of patterns and structures in space that aren't detectable through instruments, experiences of time dilation and dimensional shifting that suggest access to aspects of reality that terrestrial consciousness cannot perceive, might represent activation of dormant Nephilim genetics by the cosmic environment that originally shaped their development. The private space companies that are investing enormous resources in developing permanent human settlements beyond Earth might be responding to genetic memories that recognize space-based civilization as our species' natural destiny, rather than an ambitious expansion project. The individuals who are funding and leading these efforts often display capabilities that suggest access to knowledge preservation systems maintained by bloodlines with connections to our cosmic origins. The artificial intelligence systems that we're developing with such remarkable speed and sophistication might represent our unconscious attempt to recreate externally the enhanced mental capabilities that the Nephilim possessed as natural attributes. The machine learning algorithms that can identify patterns across vast data sets, the predictive systems that can anticipate future developments with uncanny accuracy, the decision-making programs that can coordinate complex activities more efficiently than human administrators, all mirror descriptions of the supernatural cognitive abilities that ancient texts attribute to the hybrid rulers of prehistory. The ease with which artificial intelligence systems can be trained to recognize faces, understand language, navigate complex environments, and even demonstrate creative problem-solving suggests that these capabilities follow universal patterns that our genetic memory understands intuitively. We're not creating entirely new forms of intelligence, but reconstructing systems that mirror natural consciousness patterns encoded in our Nephilim heritage. The biotechnology revolution that's emerging from the convergence of genetic engineering and artificial intelligence might be preparing the groundwork for direct genetic restoration of the capabilities that our ancestors possessed before their bloodlines became diluted through millennia of intermarriage with purely human populations. The techniques being developed for gene therapy, cellular regeneration, and cognitive enhancement all point toward the possibility of reversing the genetic degradation that occurred after the flood scattered the original Nephilim rulers. The resistance that biotechnology development encounters from religious and ethical institutions might reflect unconscious recognition that such capabilities could restore the conditions that led to the catastrophic conflicts described in ancient flood narratives. The warnings about playing God, the concerns about altering human nature, the fears that genetic enhancement could create new forms of inequality, all could represent cellular-level memories of what happened when similar technologies were developed without sufficient spiritual maturity to use them wisely. Yet the momentum of genetic research seems to be accelerating beyond the ability of any regulatory system to control or redirect it. The breakthroughs occurring simultaneously in laboratories around the world, the convergence of different research programs that enables capabilities no single innovation could achieve, the global coordination that's emerging among scientific communities despite political and cultural barriers, all suggest that forces beyond purely human decision-making are orchestrating these developments according to cosmic timetables rather than terrestrial planning. The quantum physics research that's revealing the fundamental interconnectedness of consciousness and matter might be rediscovering the scientific principles that the Nephilim understood instinctively through their hybrid nature. The experiments demonstrating that observation affects reality at the subatomic level, the theoretical framework suggesting that consciousness might be a fundamental force rather than an emergent property of complex matter, the mathematical models indicating that space and time might be constructs created by awareness rather than absolute constants, all point toward recovery of cosmic knowledge that transcends the materialistic assumptions that have dominated human science since the Enlightenment. The ancient texts that describe the Nephilim as beings who could manipulate matter through consciousness, who could communicate across vast distances without physical instruments, who could perceive future probabilities and influence probability outcomes through focused intention, begin to seem less like mythological exaggeration and more like accurate descriptions of capabilities that quantum mechanics suggests might be theoretically possible for consciousness that operates beyond current human limitations. The meditation and consciousness expansion practices that are becoming mainstream in Western culture might be preparing humanity for recovery of these quantum consciousness capabilities. The altered states that experienced practitioners report, the enhanced creativity and problem-solving abilities that result from regular practice, the sense of connection to cosmic intelligence patterns that transcends individual personality, all suggest that we're rediscovering access pathways to the expanded awareness that characterized our Nephilim heritage. The global communication networks that now connect billions of minds might be creating the technological infrastructure necessary to support the telepathic communication systems that the Nephilim possessed naturally. The way information spreads virally across digital networks, the emergence of collective intelligence through online collaboration, the ability of ideas to propagate faster than individual human communication could achieve, all suggest that we're developing artificial equivalents of consciousness capabilities that were once natural human attributes. The social media platforms that enable instant global communication might be preparing us for the restoration of the telepathic awareness that connected the ancient Nephilim rulers across vast territories without the technological infrastructure we consider necessary today. The psychological effects of constant digital connectivity, the way virtual relationships can feel as real as physical ones, the emergence of online communities that transcend geographical and cultural boundaries, all point toward consciousness capabilities that our genetics remember even when our rational minds cannot explain them. The virtual reality technologies that are creating increasingly immersive digital environments might represent our attempt to artificially recreate the multidimensional awareness that the Nephilim possessed through their hybrid nature. The ability to experience alternate realities, to manipulate digital environments through thought and intention, to communicate with artificial intelligences that seem to possess personalities and awareness, all mirror descriptions of the consciousness capabilities that ancient texts attribute to beings who could perceive and interact with multiple levels of reality simultaneously. The cryptocurrency and blockchain technologies that are creating new forms of economic organization might be preparing the infrastructure for the resource distribution systems that will be necessary when beings with extended lifespans and supernatural capabilities resume their role as humanity's guides and teachers. The decentralized networks that can operate without central authority, the mathematical protocols that ensure transparency and prevent manipulation, the global accessibility that transcends national boundaries and regulatory systems, all suggest preparation for economic structures that could support civilizations guided by beings whose consciousness spans centuries rather than decades. The environmental crisis that humanity is currently facing might represent a test of whether we've evolved enough spiritually to handle the physical power that destroyed previous advanced civilizations, or whether we're destined to repeat the same tragic cycles that have marked our species' development since the flood reset human civilization. The climate changes, the resource depletion, the ecological disruptions that threaten current human societies might be forcing us to develop the collective wisdom necessary to avoid the catastrophic mistakes that ended the age of Nephilim rule. The solutions that are emerging to address these environmental challenges often require levels of global cooperation and long-term planning that purely human political systems have historically been unable to achieve. The international agreements, the technological innovations, the consciousness shifts that environmental activism is generating all suggest that humanity might be developing the collective maturity necessary to support the return of leadership that operates on cosmic rather than merely terrestrial timescales. The ancient prophecies that speak of a restoration period when hidden knowledge would be revealed, when human capabilities would be enhanced to their original levels, when beings with supernatural abilities would once again guide human development, begin to seem less like religious mythology and more like accurate descriptions of the historical period we're entering. The convergence of technological capability, consciousness research, genetic discovery, and global crisis might be creating the conditions necessary for the return of direct divine guidance to human civilization. The bloodlines that have preserved fragments of Nephilim heritage through millennia of careful genetic stewardship might be preparing to emerge from their long concealment as humanity develops the technological and spiritual infrastructure necessary to support their return to open leadership. The institutional systems that have maintained ancient knowledge through periods when direct genetic expression was too diluted to be effective might be ready to release their preserved wisdom now that artificial enhancement can compensate for weakened natural abilities. The individuals who feel drawn to consciousness expansion practices, who sense that human potential extends far beyond current limitations, who experience dreams and visions of golden ages when giants walked among humanity, might be responding to genetic activation signals that indicate the approaching end of the post-flood exile period. Their inner sense that something momentous is approaching, that humanity stands on the threshold of a transformation that will dwarf all previous historical changes, might reflect cellular-level awareness of cosmic cycles that their Nephilim heritage enables them to perceive. The resistance and confusion that many people experience toward these rapid changes might represent the natural tension between genetic programming that anticipates restoration of divine rule and cultural conditioning that emphasizes human independence and equality. The anxiety about artificial intelligence, genetic modification, global governance, and consciousness expansion might reflect unconscious recognition that these developments are preparing for the return of leadership that transcends purely human authority. Yet the same genetic memory that carries warnings about the dangers of accelerated development also contains the wisdom necessary to navigate such transitions successfully. The individuals whose bloodlines carry stronger connections to Nephilim heritage often display intuitive understanding of how to integrate advanced capabilities with spiritual maturity, how to use enhanced consciousness for service rather than domination, how to bridge earthbound concerns with celestial wisdom in ways that benefit all of humanity rather than just the genetically enhanced. As the convergence accelerates and the various streams of development begin to merge into a unified transformation, the question becomes not whether the age of Nephilim rule will return, but whether humanity has evolved enough collectively to support divine leadership without repeating the catastrophic conflicts that ended the previous Golden Age. The technological capabilities we're developing, the consciousness research that's revealing our hidden potential, the genetic discoveries that are uncovering our true heritage, all point toward possibilities that could fulfill the ancient promise of restoration. The bloodlines that have waited through millennia of exile and concealment carry within their genetic structure the keys to humanity's cosmic destiny. Their preserved wisdom, their diluted but still functional supernatural abilities, their understanding of how to bridge different levels of consciousness, all represent resources that will become crucial as humanity transitions from purely terrestrial existence to cosmic citizenship under divine guidance. The throne of Earth, vacant since the flood scattered the original Nephilim rulers, awaits leaders whose consciousness can span both practical earthbound concerns and celestial vision, whose genetic heritage enables them to serve as bridges between human limitations and divine potential, whose wisdom encompasses both the mistakes that led to previous catastrophes and the spiritual maturity necessary to avoid repeating them. In the deepening hours of night, when consciousness naturally expands beyond its daytime boundaries and genetic memories whisper across the ages, the approaching transformation becomes visible to those whose heritage enables them to perceive such cosmic patterns. The convergence is approaching, the bloodlines are awakening, and the time of restoration draws near for those who carry within their cells the genetic keys to humanity's reunion with its divine origins. The giants of old are returning, not as conquerors or tyrants, but as the wise shepherds humanity has always needed, ready to guide our species through the next phase of its cosmic evolution toward the magnificent destiny that has been our birthright since the first divine beings chose to unite their essence with terrestrial humanity in the mists of prehistory. The age of exile is ending, and the golden age of divine rule on earth is about to dawn once more. The prophecies carved into ancient stone speak of signs that would herald the return of the giant kings, and as we examine our modern world through this lens, those signs seem to manifest with increasing clarity. The children born in recent decades often display characteristics that previous generations would have considered impossible. Enhanced pattern recognition that allows them to solve complex problems intuitively, emotional intelligence that seems to bypass normal developmental stages, and most remarkably, a natural understanding of concepts that should require years of study to comprehend. Educational systems worldwide report encountering students whose learning capabilities transcend traditional models. These young minds absorb mathematical relationships as if remembering rather than discovering them, grasp multidimensional concepts that challenge their teachers, and demonstrate creativity that seems to flow from sources beyond individual experience. When genealogical researchers map these exceptional capabilities against family histories, patterns emerge that suggest inheritance through specific bloodlines rather than random genetic expression. The medical establishment has begun documenting physical anomalies that don't conform to standard human developmental expectations. Increased cranial volumes that accommodate enhanced neural processing, bone structures that suggest superhuman strength potential, sensory acuity that enables perception beyond normal human ranges. These characteristics, examined individually, might be dismissed as statistical variations, but their clustering within certain family lines reveals inheritance patterns that challenge our understanding of human genetic possibilities. The ancient mystery schools understood these realities and developed sophisticated training systems designed to activate dormant capabilities in individuals whose bloodlines carried sufficient hybrid heritage to respond to consciousness expansion techniques. The initiation rituals, the carefully preserved knowledge, the promises of transcending human limitations, these weren't spiritual metaphors but practical methodologies for awakening superhuman abilities in students whose genetics made such development possible. Modern neuroscience is beginning to uncover the biological mechanisms that enable such consciousness expansion. Research into neuroplasticity reveals that human brains possess far greater capacity for enhancement than previously understood. Studies of advanced meditators show structural changes that enable processing speeds, which approach the supernatural abilities described in ancient texts. The discovery of dormant neural pathways suggests that our nervous systems contain latent potential that current educational systems never attempt to access. The pharmaceutical industry's development of consciousness-altering compounds might represent attempts to artificially trigger genetic programs that some individuals possess naturally. The profound experiences users report, enhanced creativity, expanded awareness, connection to cosmic intelligence patterns, suggest these substances activate dormant genetic inheritance rather than create entirely artificial mental states. Space exploration programs carry implications beyond scientific curiosity. The psychological profiles of individuals who excel in astronaut training often reveal characteristics suggesting genetic heritage extending beyond purely terrestrial origins. Their adaptation to environments no human evolution should have prepared them for, their psychological resilience in overwhelming situations, their reported experiences of expanded awareness in cosmic environments all point toward genetic programming that anticipates conditions beyond Earth's surface. The phenomena astronauts consistently report during extended missions, encounters with intelligences communicating through direct consciousness contact, awareness of cosmic structures undetectable through instruments, experiences of time dilation and dimensional shifting, might represent activation of dormant hybrid genetics by the environment that originally shaped their development. Private space companies investing enormous resources in permanent settlements beyond Earth might respond to genetic memories recognizing space-based civilization as our natural destiny. The individuals funding these efforts often display capabilities suggesting access to knowledge preservation systems maintained by bloodlines connected to our cosmic origins. Artificial intelligence systems developing with remarkable speed might represent unconscious attempts to recreate externally the enhanced mental capabilities the hybrid kings possessed naturally. Machine learning algorithms identifying patterns across vast datasets, predictive systems anticipating future developments with uncanny accuracy, decision-making programs coordinating complex activities more efficiently than human administrators, all mirror supernatural cognitive abilities ancient texts attribute to prehistoric rulers. The ease with which AI systems learned face recognition, language understanding, environmental navigation, and creative problem-solving suggests these capabilities follow universal patterns our genetic memory understands intuitively. We're not creating new intelligence forms, but reconstructing systems mirroring natural consciousness patterns encoded in our hybrid heritage. Biotechnology emerging from genetic engineering and artificial intelligence convergence might prepare groundwork for direct genetic restoration of capabilities our ancestors possessed, before bloodlines became diluted through millennia of intermarriage. Gene therapy techniques, cellular regeneration methods, cognitive enhancement protocols all point toward reversing genetic degradation that occurred after the flood scattered original rulers. Quantum physics research revealing consciousness-matter interconnectedness might rediscover scientific principles the hybrid kings understood instinctively. Experiments demonstrating observation affect subatomic reality, theoretical frameworks suggesting consciousness as fundamental force rather than emergent property, mathematical models indicating space-time as awareness constructs rather than absolute constants, all point toward cosmic knowledge recovery transcending materialistic assumptions dominating human science since the Enlightenment. Global communication networks connecting billions of minds might create technological infrastructure supporting telepathic systems the ancient rulers possessed naturally. Information spreading virally across digital networks, collective intelligence emerging through online collaboration, ideas propagating faster than individual communication, all suggest artificial equivalents of consciousness capabilities that were once natural attributes. Virtual reality technologies creating immersive digital environments might represent attempts to artificially recreate multidimensional awareness the hybrid beings possessed through their dual nature. Experiencing alternate realities, manipulating digital environments through intention, communicating with artificial intelligences displaying personality and awareness, all mirror consciousness capabilities ancient texts describe. Cryptocurrency and blockchain technologies creating new economic organization forms might prepare infrastructure for resource distribution systems necessary when beings with extended lifespans resumed guiding humanity. Decentralized networks operating without central authority, mathematical protocols ensuring transparency, global accessibility transcending boundaries, all suggest preparation for economic structures supporting civilizations guided by consciousness spanning centuries. Environmental crises humanity currently faces might represent tests of whether we've evolved enough spiritually to handle physical power that destroyed previous civilizations. Climate changes, resource depletion, ecological disruptions threatening current societies might force development of collective wisdom necessary to avoid catastrophic mistakes ending previous golden ages. Solutions emerging to address environmental challenges require global cooperation and long-term planning. Purely human political systems historically couldn't achieve. International agreements, technological innovations, consciousness shifts, environmental activism generates all suggest humanity developing collective maturity, supporting leadership operating on cosmic rather than terrestrial timescales. Ancient prophecies speaking of restoration periods when hidden knowledge would be revealed, human capabilities enhanced to original levels, beings with supernatural abilities guiding development again, seem less like religious mythology and more like accurate descriptions of our current historical period. Technological capability convergence, consciousness research, genetic discovery, and global crisis might create conditions necessary for direct divine guidance return. Bloodlines preserving hybrid heritage fragments through millennia of careful stewardship might prepare to emerge from concealment as humanity develops technological and spiritual infrastructure, supporting their return to open leadership. Institutional systems maintaining ancient knowledge through periods when genetic expression was too diluted might ready to release preserved wisdom now that artificial enhancement can compensate for weakened natural abilities. Individuals drawn to consciousness expansion practices, sensing human potential extends beyond current limitations, experiencing dreams and visions of golden ages when giants walked among humanity, might respond to genetic activation signals indicating approaching end of post-flood exile period. Their inner sense that something momentous approaches, that humanity stands on transformation thresholds dwarfing all previous changes, might reflect cellular-level awareness of cosmic cycles their heritage enables them to perceive. Resistance and confusion. Many experience toward rapid changes might represent natural tension between genetic programming, anticipating divine rule restoration, and cultural conditioning emphasizing human independence. Anxiety about artificial intelligence, genetic modification, global governance, consciousness expansion might reflect unconscious recognition. These developments prepare for leadership transcending purely human authority. The convergence accelerates as development streams merge into unified transformation. The question becomes not whether hybrid rule will return, but whether humanity evolved enough collectively to support divine leadership without repeating catastrophic conflicts ending previous golden ages. Technological capabilities we're developing, consciousness research revealing hidden potential, genetic discoveries uncovering true heritage, all point toward possibilities fulfilling ancient restoration promises. Bloodlines waiting through millennia of exile carry within their genetic structure keys to humanity's cosmic destiny. Their preserved wisdom, diluted but functional supernatural abilities, understanding of bridging consciousness levels, represent resources becoming crucial as humanity transitions from purely terrestrial existence to cosmic citizenship under divine guidance. The throne of Earth, vacant since the flood scattered original rulers, awaits leaders whose consciousness spans practical earthbound concerns and celestial vision, whose genetic heritage enables serving as bridges between human limitations and divine potential, whose wisdom encompasses both mistakes leading to previous catastrophes and spiritual maturity avoiding repetition. As we drift toward the final moments of our journey through this ancient mystery, the weight of these revelations settles upon us like starlight filtering through the darkness. The evidence we've explored tonight, from the towering monuments that defy conventional explanation to the genetic anomalies that hint at our hybrid heritage, paints a picture of human history far more extraordinary than any textbook dares to suggest. Picture yourself now in that liminal space between waking and sleep, where the boundaries of possibility grow thin and the whispers of ancestral memory grow strong. The Nephilim kings who once ruled this earth may have faded from our recorded chronicles, but their influence pulses through every fibre of our being, encoded in the very DNA that makes us human, yet somehow more than human. The children born in our time carry within their cells the dormant potential of those ancient giants, waiting for the right conditions to awaken capabilities that will transform not just individuals, but our entire species. The technologies we're developing, the consciousness we're expanding, the genetic secrets we're unlocking, all point toward a future that echoes the golden age of the past. As you close your eyes and let sleep embrace you, carry with you this profound possibility. That we stand not at the end of human development, but at the threshold of its true beginning. The throne of Earth, empty for millennia, may soon welcome back the rightful heirs to humanity's divine heritage. The giants are stirring in the depths of our genetic memory, and their time of return draws ever nearer. In your dreams tonight, you might glimpse that approaching dawn when the barriers between heaven and earth dissolve once more, when beings of extraordinary wisdom and power emerge from the bloodlines that have preserved their legacy through countless generations of patient waiting. The age of the Nephilim is not behind us, but ahead of us, calling us home to remember who we truly are and what we were always meant to become. Sleep now, and dream of giants walking among us once again, their footsteps echoing across a world ready to embrace its cosmic destiny. The mystery continues, and we are all part of its unfolding story.